The funny thing about the mind is that everyone thinks they have one. Everyone believes they know where it sits, and yet nobody can ever quite point to it. You can tap your head, you can touch your chest, you can close your eyes and feel very intelligent doing it. But none of that gets you any closer to locating the thing that actually thinks, imagines, fears, hopes, remembers, and dreams. And that's the part that always bothered me, because if something rules your life so profoundly, your decisions, your beliefs, your emotions, even your sense of identity, shouldn't you at least know where it exists? But the more you examine the mind, the stranger it becomes. You realize that electrical signals aren't thoughts, they're just the noise the brain makes while you are thinking. And memories aren't stored like files in a cabinet. They rebuild themselves each time, like a story retold by an unreliable narrator. And consciousness, the awareness that you are you, is the biggest mystery of all. It's like the universe hid the answer in plain sight, right behind your ability to ask the question. So today's message isn't about having all the answers. It's about thinking clearly, honestly, and bravely about the one tool that determines the quality of your life. Not the body you live in, not the circumstances around you, but the mind that interprets everything, decides everything, and shapes everything. When you begin to investigate the mind the way a physicist investigates light or energy, you quickly discover that the question, where does the mind exist, is the wrong question entirely. The mind isn't an object you can slice open, put under a microscope, label, and classify. It is not located in a specific corner of the brain the way your heart sits in your chest or your lungs sit behind your ribs. Instead, the mind behaves more like a dance than a dancer. It is a process, a continuous unfolding of activity, patterns, interpretations, and reactions that arise from the interaction of the brain, the body, and the world around you. You never step into the same mind twice because it is always changing. If you break down what you call your mind, you start finding parts that don't quite belong to you. Your memories have been edited, reshaped, reinforced, or erased depending on your emotional states. Your thoughts appear without your permission. Your fears were planted by past experiences, culture, and survival instincts baked into your biology. Even your desires, the things you think you genuinely want, are often reactions to situations you didn't choose. So the first step is understanding that the mind is not a thing you have, but a phenomenon you participate in. You are both the observer and the observed, the storyteller and the story, the scientist and the experiment unfolding in real time. This becomes clearer when you consider how the brain actually works. Billions of neurons fire in patterns that no one fully understands. Everything you experience, every memory, emotion, image, and intention is built from these patterns. But here's the surprising part: the patterns don't exist until the brain produces them in the moment. That means your mind isn't stored inside you like files on a disk. It is generated in real time, assembled from experience, perception, and interpretation. Your mind is a moment-to-moment creation, like a movie projector that only works when the light is turned on. People often assume that the mind must sit somewhere in the brain because the brain lights up under scanners when you think or feel something. But that is like assuming music exists inside a piano simply because strings vibrate when you press a key. The vibrations aren't the music, they're the physical expression of something deeper. In the same way, brain signals aren't the mind, they're what the mind uses to express itself. This distinction is important because it helps you stop identifying yourself with the noise of your thoughts. When you realize thoughts are events rather than commands, you begin to see that not everything that appears in your mind deserves your belief or emotional investment. Another interesting fact is that much of what the mind does happens without your conscious awareness. Scientists estimate that more than 95% of brain activity occurs below the level of conscious thought. So when you think you're thinking, most of the thinking has already happened. Your conscious mind is like a narrator that shows up late to the movie and then pretends it understood the entire plot. This explains why you sometimes react before you understand, why you form habits without noticing, and why you feel emotions you can't explain. The mind is a layered structure, and what you call you is just the top layer, the part observing the much larger system running underneath. But the most fascinating discovery of all is that the mind is influenced by attention. Whatever you focus on becomes stronger, louder, and more dominant. Attention is like the fuel that feeds certain patterns of thought and starves others. This means you may not control the initial appearance of a thought, but you absolutely influence whether it stays, grows, and becomes part of your mental identity. In physics, the observer changes the experiment simply by observing it. The same is true with the mind. When you observe your thoughts, you change your relationship with them. You shift from being controlled by them to understanding them. And once you understand them, their power over you weakens. Your mind, therefore, exists not in a location, but in an interaction between neurons, between sensations, between experiences, and between your awareness and the world. It is dynamic, not static. It emerges, dissolves, reforms, and evolves every moment. This realization is liberating because it means your mind is not fixed. It can be rewired, reshaped, trained, and elevated. You are not stuck with the mind you woke up with this morning. You can participate in creating a better one by choosing what to focus on, what to question, what to release, and what to believe. The mind is not a place you live inside. It is a process you help shape with every thought you feed and every thought you let pass like clouds drifting across an open sky. You don't control most thoughts, but you can control which ones you believe, and this is one of the most misunderstood truths about the human mind. People imagine they are responsible for every single thing that appears in their mental space, as if each thought is a choice they consciously selected. But the mind doesn't work that way. Thoughts appear the same way clouds pass across the sky or waves rise on the ocean. They arise from automatic brain processes, from memory, from fear, from habit, from biology, from things you saw years ago and forgot, from words someone spoke to you when you were 12, from patterns you inherited without ever noticing. The mind is a generator of constant mental activity, most of which is simply noise. And the surprising thing is, the noise is not the problem. The problem is when you start believing the noise is you. It's fascinating when you look at the mind scientifically, because you realize that the majority of your thoughts are not deliberate. They're not the result of reasoning or decision making. They're just spontaneous firings of neural circuits trying to keep you alive, safe, consistent, predictable. Your brain evolved for survival, not for truth. So it throws thoughts at you the way a worried friend throws advice, half helpful, half irrational, and mostly reactive. You may suddenly think something negative about yourself, something frightening about the future, something judgmental about someone else, something depressing about your past. But none of those thoughts are meaningful until you attach meaning to them. The thought itself is just an event. It gains power only when you believe it. This is where your control begins. Not at the moment the thought appears, because you didn't choose it. You didn't design it. You didn't call it into existence. It simply showed up. Your control begins with the moment you decide whether that thought deserves your trust. A thought can walk into your mind uninvited, but you choose whether it gets to sit down and make itself at home. This is the difference between awareness and identification. Awareness is noticing the thought. Identification is becoming the thought. And most people go through life identifying with thoughts they never consciously chose. If you observe your mind the way a scientist observes an experiment, you start noticing something remarkable. Thoughts pass through in a constant stream, and most of them contradict one another. One moment you feel confident, the next insecure. One moment excited, the next afraid. One moment inspired, the next discouraged. If the thoughts were truly you, they wouldn't contradict themselves so frequently. The contradiction reveals something important. The mind is producing options, not truths. It is offering interpretations, not reality. It is presenting possibilities, not instructions. The power lies in your ability to decide which interpretation you will accept. Imagine standing on a train platform. Trains arrive one after another, each labeled with a different destination. Some lead to fear, some to self-doubt, some to anger, some to hope, some to creativity, some to peace. You don't control the arrival of the trains, but you absolutely control which one you step onto. Every thought is a train. Every belief is a destination. Most people jump onto every train without questioning where it leads. But clarity comes when you learn to watch the trains without boarding them automatically. What makes a thought believable is not its truth, but its familiarity. The brain loves what it has repeated the longest. So if you have spent years believing you're not good enough, or the world is dangerous, or people are untrustworthy, those thoughts will continue appearing because they are well-worn pathways. But repetition is not reality. A lie told by your brain 1,000 times still remains a lie. And the moment you begin questioning the thought, the neural pathway weakens. That is how the mind rewires itself, not by force, but by attention. When you stop feeding certain thoughts with belief, they lose their weight. Some thoughts are the result of emotional states. When you're tired, the mind generates hopeless thoughts. When you're anxious, it produces catastrophic ones. When you're angry, it creates hostile ones. But the thought is not the truth. It is simply the emotional weather passing through your nervous system. You don't need to argue with the thought or fight it. You just need to recognize its origin. You can say, this is a fear-generated thought, or this is a fatigue-generated thought. The moment you label it, you create distance, and distance gives you control. The ability to choose what you believe is the foundation of mental freedom. You may wake up with 100 random thoughts, but you choose which one becomes the voice of your day. You may walk into a challenge with 1,000 doubts, but you choose which ones deserve attention. You may face a setback with a swarm of negative predictions, but you choose which ones you invest in. The mind throws the sparks, but you decide which ones start a fire. This is why awareness is more powerful than positive thinking. Positive thinking tries to replace thoughts with better ones. Awareness allows thoughts to come and go without giving them undue importance. When you detach from the automatic stream, you begin to see that thoughts are suggestions, not commands. They are possibilities, not identities. They are stories, not obligations. The mind will continue generating thoughts because that is what the mind does. But you do not have to continue believing every one of them. When you master this, your mental world changes not because the thoughts stop coming, but because they stop controlling you. The mind grows sharper or weaker based on the questions you dare to ask, because a question is not just a request for information. It is a tool that shapes your perception of reality. Most people underestimate the power of a question. They think questions are just the things you ask when you don't know something. But the truth is far more interesting. The quality of your thinking depends on the quality of the questions you place in front of your mind. A shallow question produces shallow thought. A fearful question produces fearful thinking. A courageous question forces the mind to expand, stretch, investigate, and reconfigure itself. When you ask a question that challenges your assumptions, you force your brain to build new connections. When you avoid questions because they make you uncomfortable, you force your brain to shrink into habits. This is why children learn so fast. They ask questions constantly. Why is the sky blue? Why can birds fly? Why do we dream? Why do people yell? Each question pushes the mind outward, but somewhere along the way, adults stop asking questions. Not because the world suddenly makes sense, but because questions become threatening. They expose what you don't know. They reveal the gaps in your thinking. They demand curiosity instead of certainty. And certainty is comfortable. But comfort is the enemy of growth. When you stop questioning, your mind stops expanding. It becomes rigid, predictable, and lazy. A mind that does not ask questions becomes a prisoner of its own assumptions. It repeats the same patterns, makes the same decisions, and interprets the world the same way it did years ago. It becomes trapped inside old beliefs that may not even be true anymore. But a mind that asks questions remains alive. It stays fluid. It keeps evolving. The most brilliant people on earth are not the ones who know the most. They are the ones who question the most. Einstein once said that he had no special talent, only passionate curiosity. That curiosity expressed itself through relentless questioning. Feynman himself built his entire philosophy on the idea that you should never fool yourself. And the easiest way to avoid fooling yourself is to ask better questions. Questions force the brain to work. They activate networks that would otherwise remain dormant. When you ask, what else could this mean? Or is this actually true? Or what am I missing? You ignite cognitive processes that sharpen perception and deepen understanding. The moment you ask a new question, your brain begins searching for answers, connecting ideas, discarding irrelevant assumptions, and reorganizing information. It does this even when you are not aware of it. A good question plants itself into your subconscious and continues working silently, restructuring your worldview piece by piece. But asking questions is not always comfortable, because good questions break your illusions. They push you to confront discomfort. They challenge your identity. They expose your logical blind spots. A question like, "Why am I afraid of this?" or "Why do I believe this is impossible?" forces you to examine not just the situation but yourself. Many people avoid these kinds of questions because they don't want to face the answers. So they settle for surface level thinking, never realizing that the fear of questioning is exactly what keeps them mentally weak. A sharp mind is not one that has memorized facts. It is one that can investigate itself. A weak mind is not one that lacks intelligence, but one that refuses to be examined. Every breakthrough in science, psychology, philosophy, and even spirituality began with someone daring to ask a question others avoided. Why do objects fall? What is light made of? Why do we suffer? What is consciousness? What happens when we die? These questions changed the trajectory of human understanding, not because someone had the answer, but because someone had the courage to ask. The questions you ask about your own life shape your mental environment in exactly the same way. A person who asks, "Why does everything bad happen to me?" weakens their mind, because the question assumes victimhood, and the brain will search for answers that confirm it. A person who asks, "What can I learn from this situation?" sharpens their mind, because the question invites growth. The brain loves to answer whatever question you give it, even if the question hurts you. So you must be careful which questions you feed your mind. They become the lens through which you interpret every experience. Sometimes the most powerful questions are the ones that challenge your story. Why do I believe I am not capable? Who told me I couldn't change? What would happen if I tried again? These questions disrupt the autopilot of your mind. They force you to think actively instead of passively. They redirect your mental energy from fear to possibility. Even if you don't have the answer yet, the act of asking changes your mental landscape. It opens doors that didn't exist before. It creates pathways where none existed. It makes your mind alert, alive, and aware. The mind is like a muscle. If you challenge it with demanding questions, it grows stronger. If you feed it the same recycled thoughts, it atrophies. The courage to ask is more important than the ability to answer. Answers may change over time, but asking is what keeps the mind sharp. Asking is what prevents stagnation. Asking is what moves you from confusion to clarity, from limitation to possibility, from rigidity to intelligence. The mind becomes what you demand of it. And the moment you dare to ask bigger questions, you invite your mind to become bigger too. Awareness is the master key that rewires how your mind behaves, because it is the only tool that allows you to observe the machinery of thought without becoming trapped in it. Most people think they are their thoughts, as if every idea, every fear, every impulse is an inseparable part of their identity. But awareness introduces a fundamental distinction. You are not your thoughts. You are the observer of your thoughts. And that distinction changes everything. When you notice a thought without judgment, when you see it arise, and pass like a cloud moving across the sky, your brain begins to recognize that it is producing events rather than delivering commands. This recognition is the first step toward rewiring your mind, because once a thought loses its unquestioned authority, it can no longer control your behavior in the automatic way it once did. Consider the way most people react to emotions. Anxiety arises, and the mind floods with a chain of fearful predictions. Anger emerges, and the mind instantly forms plans for revenge or judgment. Sadness appears, and the mind spirals into hopeless narratives. Without awareness, the mind is like a room full of leaping monkeys, each one grabbing your attention and dictating your next move. Awareness is the act of opening a window in that room. You see the chaos objectively. You realize that the monkeys are not you, they are simply impulses. And this realization is not passive. It is transformative. By simply noticing what is happening inside, you create the possibility of a response that is deliberate rather than reactive. Awareness allows you to step back and choose which impulses to engage with and which to let dissolve. Over time, this practice changes the wiring of the brain itself, because the neural pathways reinforced by attention become stronger, while those ignored weaken. The brain is highly plastic, which means it is constantly remodeling itself based on experience. Every time you repeat a thought, act on an impulse, or feed a habit, you reinforce a pathway in the brain. But awareness changes which pathways are reinforced. When you observe a destructive thought and refrain from believing or acting on it, you prevent the brain from strengthening that circuit. When you notice a helpful or creative idea and choose to explore it, you amplify that pathway. In other words, awareness acts like a spotlight. Wherever it shines, growth and clarity follow. Where it does not shine, confusion and automaticity thrive. This is why masters of meditation and mindfulness report that mere observation can transform the quality of their mental life. Awareness itself becomes a training tool for the mind. Awareness also rewires the mind because it creates space between stimulus and reaction. Normally, the mind reacts automatically to inputs. A word triggers anger, a memory triggers fear, a sensation triggers craving. These reactions happen in milliseconds, often before you even realize what has occurred. But awareness interrupts this process. It allows you to notice the trigger and observe the initial response before acting on it. That pause, brief as it may be, is a powerful moment of choice. It is in that moment that the brain begins to learn new patterns. By consistently noticing and responding consciously, you gradually train your mind to act from observation rather than impulse. This is not just theoretical. Neuroscientists have observed structural changes in the brains of individuals who practice awareness regularly. Regions associated with attention, emotional regulation, and self-reflection become thicker and more connected. Awareness literally rewires the brain at a physical level. Another aspect of awareness is that it illuminates unconscious biases and automatic beliefs. Most people go through life assuming that what they feel and think is real and permanent without questioning its origin. Awareness exposes the hidden layers of thought, the assumptions, the judgments, the conditioning that operate silently in the background. When these patterns are observed, they lose their unquestioned power. You begin to see that beliefs are not immutable truths, but mental constructs that can be examined, challenged, and changed. And the very act of questioning a belief creates new neural pathways. Each observation, each moment of noticing is like a small mental exercise that strengthens your cognitive flexibility, sharpens your attention, and enhances your capacity for self-regulation. Awareness also amplifies creativity because it enables the mind to break free from automatic loops. When you are fully conscious of your thought processes, you notice patterns and assumptions you would otherwise take for granted. You begin to see possibilities that were invisible when you were acting on autopilot. You can combine ideas in novel ways because you are no longer constrained by habitual mental pathways. Your mind becomes a laboratory where experiments are possible. Awareness gives you access to the raw material of thought, the sensations, the impulses, the images, the emotions, and allows you to recombine them freely. In this sense, awareness is both a tool for observation and a tool for creation. It is simultaneously a mirror and a chisel, reflecting reality and shaping it. Ultimately, awareness functions as the master key because it allows you to recognize the difference between the mind's noise and the mind's signal. Thoughts will always arise, emotions will always flare, impulses will always pull at you, but awareness lets you distinguish between what is useful and what is misleading. It enables you to direct your attention deliberately, reinforce helpful circuits, and weaken unhelpful ones. By observing, questioning, pausing, and reflecting, you gradually train the mind to behave in ways aligned with clarity, wisdom, and intention rather than habit, fear, or impulse. Over time, the simple act of noticing becomes the force that rewires your mental landscape, creating a mind that is sharper, calmer, more flexible, and increasingly free from automatic domination by its own processes. So, after all this exploration, what have we really discovered? The mind is not a thing you can point to or lock in a box. It is a living, breathing process, a continuous unfolding of thoughts, impulses, questions, and awareness. It is at once a generator of chaos and a laboratory of possibility. And the astonishing part is that the keys to understanding and shaping it are all within you. Curiosity sharpens it, questions stretch it, attention strengthens it, and awareness rewires it. You may not control every thought that appears, but you do control which ones you give power to. You may not stop emotions from arising, but you can observe them and choose how to respond. You may not hold a map of consciousness, but you can navigate it with honesty, curiosity, and courage. So the challenge is simple, yet profound. Pay attention, ask daring questions, notice what arises, and don't believe everything your mind tells you. The universe of your mind is vast, mysterious, and endlessly fascinating, and the only way to explore it is to be awake, to be aware, to participate consciously. Because once you start noticing, once you start questioning, once you start choosing, the mind no longer rules you. It becomes your most powerful ally in understanding, learning, and living fully. And that, in the end, is the discovery the mind exists wherever attention and awareness meet, and it grows as much as you allow yourself to see.